Tonight, dim the lights a little if you can. Let the room settle. Maybe there is a soft hum from a fan, or the faint hush of a city outside your window. Wherever you are listening from, tell me in the comments what corner of the world you are in. Not because you have to, but because it is comforting to imagine all of us, scattered across different nights, sharing the same quiet journey. And if you enjoy this kind of slow history, you can like or subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure. This is a place you can simply rest. Because tonight, we are stepping into a city that no longer exists the way it once did, but still lives under our streets, inside our language, and inside the way we organize the world. We are walking into the daily life of the Roman Empire. Not the Rome of statues and speeches, not the Rome of emperors on coins, but the Rome of ordinary mornings, the Rome of cramped apartments and bread lines, the Rome of water jars, aching feet, gossip in the bathhouse steam, oil lamps trembling in the dark. And if you fall asleep, that is perfectly fine. In fact, that is part of the design. Let the story keep moving even if you drift away. But before you do, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what a Roman did first thing after waking up? In a world without alarms, without toothbrushes, without electric light? How did they smell? How did they clean themselves? What did they eat? Where did they work? And why did the bathhouse become the heartbeat of the afternoon? Tonight, we will follow a day from sunrise to nightfall. We will begin inside Roman homes, from the wealthy domus with its cool courtyard to the crowded insula apartment blocks that leaned over narrow streets. Then we will step outside into the noise, the vendors, the animals, the carts that were banned during daylight in many places because the sound was too much. We will walk through the forum, not as tourists, but as people who have somewhere to be. We will eat what most people ate, not what the richest displayed at their feasts. We will enter the bathhouse, where the city relaxed, negotiated, argued, flirted, and listened. And at the end, we will watch Rome go to sleep, with its lamps, its dangers, its prayers, and its long, restless night. So, take a breath, and when you are ready, let us begin. A Roman morning begins with light, not with a ringing phone, not with a digital clock. Light, the pale shift of dawn slipping through shutters, bouncing off stone, moving slowly across a wall. In a small room on the top floor of a crowded apartment block, that light is thin and dusty. The air is warm, even early. The walls are close. You can hear neighbors stirring through the thin structure. You can hear someone coughing, a baby crying, the creak of wood, the heavy step of a man descending the staircase. In a wealthy house, the light enters differently. It filters into an open courtyard, the atrium, where the roof is designed to let sunlight and rain fall into a shallow indoor pool. The house feels like a quiet shell around that open center. The stone floor stays cool. The air moves. Two Romans wake up at the same time in the same city, but their worlds could not be more different. Let us start with where most people lived. If you picture Rome as endless marble, it helps to forget that image for a moment. Marble was real, yes, but it was not the everyday material of the majority. Most of the city was brick, wood, plaster, tile, and a lot of mud and smoke. The wealthy might live in a domus, a private house. You enter through a doorway, and the noise of the street fades behind you. Inside is a sequence of spaces that feel designed for control. A front reception area, rooms for sleeping, a courtyard with plants, perhaps a dining room with painted walls, perhaps a private bath if the owner is extremely wealthy. But most Romans in big cities lived in insulae, apartment buildings that could rise several stories high. These buildings were crowded, loud, and risky. Fires were common. Collapses happened. The ground floors might contain shops. Above them, families rented small rooms. The higher you lived, the cheaper it was, and the worse it became. Water was heavy to carry upstairs. Heat rose. The top floors were often the most uncomfortable. Imagine waking up there. You slept on a simple bed, maybe a mattress stuffed with straw. Or you slept on a mat. You share the space with family. Privacy is limited. Your possessions are few. You keep them close because theft is common. You wake to the sound of the street below beginning to breathe. Footsteps. A cart in the distance. A vendor calling. Somewhere, metal strikes stone. Someone is opening a shop door. Now, what is the first thing a Roman does? It depends on who you are. A wealthy Roman might be woken by a slave. The house slaves know the rhythm of the household. They move quietly. They bring water. They help dress their owner. They prepare a light breakfast. They arrange the toga if the man is going out in formal public life. Because a toga is not an easy garment. It is heavy, awkward, and it must be draped correctly, not just for comfort but for status. A poorer Roman wakes and begins moving immediately, because time is money and money is survival. The day will be hot later. Work starts early. Customers arrive early. The city does not wait for you. And then there is hygiene. In a modern world, we associate cleanliness with running water, soap, toothpaste, deodorant, fresh laundry. In Rome, cleanliness existed, but it looked different. First, smell. Rome smelled alive. It smelled of people, animals, cooking, smoke, whetstone, dust, wine, sweat, and sometimes sewage. It depended on the street, the weather, the neighborhood, the season. Now, a Roman cared about appearance, especially in public. They cared about looking respectable, orderly, clean enough. But toothbrushes did not exist as we know them. People cleaned their teeth with cloth, with small sticks, with powders. Some used abrasive mixtures. Some used strange substances. One of the most famous and most unsettling to us is the use of urine as a cleaning agent. It sounds shocking, but chemically, it contains ammonia, which can act as a cleaner. It was collected in containers in some places and even became part of a broader cleaning economy. It is not romantic. It is practical. For the face and body, Romans used water when available, and oils. Olive oil was a common companion to the skin. They would rub oil on the body, then scrape it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. The scraping removed sweat, dirt, and oil together. This was especially common in bathing contexts, but the idea of oil and scraping was part of their bodily routine. Soap existed in the ancient world, but it was not the everyday Roman default the way it becomes later in history. Oil, scraping, water, and perfumes played a role. Perfume mattered, not only for luxury but for social life. Scent was identity. It could signal wealth, taste, and care. Now, imagine clothing. Most people wore a tunic, a simple garment, men and women both. Over it, a cloak if the weather demanded. Shoes were usually leather, practical, and varied by class. The toga, though, is the symbol. Only Roman citizens had the right to wear it. It was a public statement. It was uncomfortable and yet powerful. The wealthy and politically active wore it because it said, without words, I belong here. I have standing. I have a voice. But for working people, a toga was not practical. You cannot carry loads, hammer metal, bake bread, or repair sandals in a heavy draped garment. Most people dressed for labor. Now, let us talk about breakfast. Romans did not usually eat a huge breakfast. Many people started with something small. Bread, maybe dipped in wine or olive oil, cheese, olives, fruit when available, sometimes leftovers. The day's major meal, for many, came later, often in the afternoon or evening, depending on class and schedule. And then, the day begins. Outside. Step out into a Roman street. In many places, it is narrow. Buildings lean in close. Upper floors hang over, almost touching. The sky above becomes a thin strip of blue. The street is paved in stone. There are stepping stones placed like little islands so people can cross when the street is wet with runoff. The stones also slow carts. You hear voices everywhere. Vendors calling out. A man selling hot food from a counter. Someone offering repairs. Someone shouting a price. A donkey braying. Dogs moving through gaps. Now think about transportation. In a major city like Rome, daytime cart traffic was often restricted. Too noisy, too crowded. So many heavy deliveries happened at night or early dawn. That means mornings begin with the echo of movement and commerce. Water is everything. Rome is famous for aqueducts, and for good reason. Aqueducts brought fresh water from distant sources. Water flowed into fountains, baths, some wealthy houses, and public facilities. But most ordinary people did not have a private tap. They went to public fountains. They carried water in jars. They waited in lines. Water was free in many places, but it cost you time and effort. Imagine standing at a fountain, jar in hand. The water spills constantly. The stone is worn smooth. People talk quietly. Someone complains about the heat. Someone jokes. Someone flirts. A child watches the stream as if it is magic. You lift the jar. It is heavy. You carry it back through streets. You climb stairs. You do it again later. Now, work. In the Roman world, the idea of a 9-to-5 office does not exist. But schedules do. Routines do. The city moves with patterns. If you are wealthy and politically connected, your morning might begin with the salutatio. This is the morning greeting where clients come to a patron's house. Roman society is tangled with networks. A powerful man supports less powerful men. He might offer help, protection, introductions, and sometimes money. In return, the clients offer respect, public support, and votes when politics demands it. Imagine the doorway of a wealthy house early in the morning. Men stand outside, waiting. Some are dressed well, some are not. They are hoping to be seen, to be remembered. A slave guards the entrance. Names are checked. A man steps forward, greets the patron, perhaps receives a small gift. Then the next man. It is social order made visible. If you are not part of that elite network, your morning is different. You might be a baker, a potter, a carpenter, a dock worker, a mason, a butcher, a cloth seller, a metal worker, a scribe, a teacher, a prostitute, a laborer, a slave. Rome's economy is vast, and it depends on constant work. Let us walk through the market. In a Roman city, food is everywhere, because many people do not have kitchens large enough to cook full meals. In cramped apartments, open flames are dangerous. Space is limited, so people eat outside, from street vendors and small shops. You might pass a thermopolium, a kind of hot food counter. Large clay jars are set into a counter. Inside them are stews, beans, hot wine, cooked vegetables, meats when available. A worker ladles food into a bowl. People eat standing or sitting nearby. It is fast. It is social. It is survival. Bread is the foundation. Bread and grain were life. Rome even developed systems to distribute grain to parts of the population. The politics of feeding the city mattered. If grain shipments failed, the city could riot. The empire's stability depended, in many ways, on the quiet arrival of grain from places like Egypt and North Africa. Now, hygiene again. Not personal, but urban. Where does waste go? Rome had sewers. The most famous is the Cloaca Maxima, an ancient drainage system that became part of the city's infrastructure. Public latrines existed. Some were surprisingly well built. Water ran through channels. People sat side by side on stone seats. And yes, these places could be social. It sounds strange to us, but privacy expectations were different. You could talk while using the latrine. You could gossip. You could hear news. For cleaning, some used sponges on sticks, rinsed in water. It is not pleasant to imagine, but it is part of the reality. Now, Imagine the Forum. The Forum is not a single building. It is a heart, a public space where political life, legal life, religious life, and economic life collide. If you walk into the Forum in the morning, you see movement like a living organism. Men in togas moving quickly, trying not to trip on their own status. Lawyers talking to clients. Merchants negotiating. Priests preparing rituals. Statues staring. Temples rising. And the sound. Always the sound. Speeches might happen at the rostra, the speaking platform. The crowd gathers. Some listen closely. Some are just passing through. Some are only there because they want to be seen. Court cases might occur in basilicas, large halls used for legal and commercial matters. Deals are made. Debts are argued. Contracts are discussed. Rome loved paperwork, in its own way. Not paper, often, but writing. Wax tablets, papyrus, stone inscriptions. Records mattered. Now, pause for a moment and imagine being ordinary here. You are not a senator. You are a woman carrying food. You are a slave following a wealthy family, holding parcels. You are a child trying to avoid getting crushed in the crowd. You are an old man who has seen too much and now watches it all with quiet eyes. The empire looks different from each perspective. And then there is class. Always class. Rome is a city of extremes. People with unimaginable wealth and people who struggle to eat. Slavery is woven into the system. We need to speak about it plainly, because daily life in Rome cannot be understood without it. Slaves in Rome were not a single category. Their experiences varied widely, from educated household slaves who managed accounts or taught children, to brutal labor in mines and fields where life expectancy could be short. A slave could be a cook, a cleaner, a hairdresser, a secretary, a messenger, a nurse, a construction worker, a quarry laborer, an entertainer, and a slave was property in law. That is the hard truth. Some owners were kinder, some were violent, some freed slaves, creating freedmen and freedwomen who could build lives, businesses, families. Manumission happened. Social mobility existed in certain forms, but the foundation was still ownership. Now, let us move forward in the day. By late morning, the city warms. Shadows shrink. Stone radiates heat. People take a lighter meal, if they take one at all. Bread again, cheese, fruit, perhaps a small portion of meat if they can afford it, perhaps fish, perhaps beans or lentils. Then comes the afternoon, and here we reach one of the most Roman things of all, the bathhouse. If you want to understand Rome's social life, you go to the baths. Bathing is not only cleaning, it is culture. Baths are where the city loosens its collar, where business deals are whispered, where political gossip spreads faster than any messenger, where friendships are maintained, where strangers can become familiar. Some bath complexes were enormous. They could contain exercise yards, gardens, libraries, pools, steam rooms, hot rooms, warm rooms, cold rooms. Imagine approaching one. You see a large entrance, people coming and going, the sound of voices, laughter, shouting. Inside, you move into changing areas. You leave your clothes. You might worry about theft. You might pay someone to watch your things. Then you enter the heat. The warm room, the tepidarium, eases your body. The hot room, the caldarium, wraps you in intense heat. Steam lifts. Your skin shines. You sweat out the day. You rub oil on your body. Someone scrapes it off with a strigil, removing sweat and grime. Then you plunge into the cold pool, the frigidarium, and the shock of it wakes you from the inside. This is not quick. Romans could spend hours here. They talk. They sit. They listen. They perform social life. And the baths were affordable, often very cheap, sometimes free under certain political programs, because emperors understood that baths were popular. and popularity mattered. Behind the beauty, there was labor. Someone had to keep the fires burning under the floors. The baths were heated by systems like the hypocaust, where hot air flowed under raised floors and through wall channels. That required fuel, often wood, and constant work. Slaves and workers hauled, fed flames, maintained water flow, cleaned. The baths were luxury built on labor. Now, while the baths are active, we should talk about bodies, health, and medicine. Life expectancy was lower than ours, but that does not mean no one lived long. Many died young, yes, especially infants and children. Disease, infection, accidents, poor nutrition, childbirth complications, all could end lives early. But if someone survived childhood, they might reach older ages. Romans had doctors. Many were influenced by Greek medicine. They believed in balances within the body. Treatments could include diet changes, herbs, ointments, and procedures like bloodletting, which we now see as often harmful but was considered reasonable within their framework. Surgery existed, especially in military contexts. Pain management was limited. Alcohol and certain plant substances could dull pain, but not safely or reliably. And in daily life, people mixed practical medicine with superstition and religion. Amulets, prayers, charms, offerings. Now, religion. Rome was filled with gods. But Roman religion was not only belief, it was practice. It was ritual woven into the day. In many homes, there was a small household shrine, a place for the household gods, the lares, and penates. A tiny space where a family might offer a little wine, a little food, a little incense. Public religion mattered too. Temples, festivals, processions. Religious life was also political. Priests held power. Omens were consulted. Decisions could be shaped by the interpretation of signs. Even in daily life, you might pause for a gesture, a word, a small offering, not always out of deep faith, but out of habit, tradition, and the feeling that the unseen world was close. Now, as the afternoon fades, the city shifts again. Work slows for some. Shops begin to close. The heat eases, depending on season, and then, for many, the main meal approaches. Dinner in Rome could mean very different things depending on class. For the wealthy, dinner could be a performance. Imagine a rich house at night. Oil lamps glow against painted walls. Cushions are arranged in a dining room where guests recline on couches around a low table. Servants move silently, offering dishes. The meal might begin with small appetizers, eggs, olives, vegetables, seafood, then heavier dishes. Meat, sometimes exotic, sauces heavy with flavor. A famous Roman condiment was garum, a fermented fish sauce that appears in countless recipes. It was salty, intense, and common enough to be found across the empire. Wine flows, but usually diluted with water. Drinking wine straight could be seen as crude, even barbaric. Between courses, conversation flows. Politics, poetry, philosophy, jokes, gossip. Entertainment might appear. Music, dancing, performers. A wealthy dinner is not just eating, it is status. It is showing that you have abundance, taste, connections. But most people did not live that way. For ordinary Romans, dinner was simpler. A porridge of grain, bread, again, vegetables, beans, a little cheese, perhaps a bit of fish. Meat was not daily for most. It might appear on festival days, or if someone had extra money, or if they worked in a trade that gave them access. And there is something else to remember. Even poor Romans were not always starving, but food insecurity was real. Prices could rise. Supply could fail. A bad season could bring fear. Now, while the wealthy recline, the poorer may eat in cramped rooms, on stools, or standing, or outside among other people, because the city's streets are an extension of home. Now, night. Rome at night was not like a modern city with streetlights. Darkness came quickly. Oil lamps lit interiors, but outside, streets could be dangerous. Some people carried lamps. Wealthy people might have slaves carrying torches. The night belonged to a different rhythm. Bars and taverns existed. Places to drink, gamble, argue. Prostitution was present, regulated, and common. Crime increased. Theft, assault, scams, and fire was always a fear because buildings could burn fast, especially crowded apartment blocks with wooden elements. Rome had night watchmen and firefighters, the vigils, who patrolled and responded to fires. But their effectiveness varied, and sometimes their presence was as political as it was protective. Now, let us step away from the rich and poor divide for a moment and look at women's lives. Women in Rome lived under a patriarchal system. They did not have the same political rights as men. They could not vote in the way we imagine modern voting. They could not hold many public offices, but women were not invisible. They managed households. They ran businesses, especially in certain contexts. Some owned property. Some worked as artisans, vendors, midwives. Elite women could wield influence through family networks, marriages, relationships, and cultural presence. Daily life for a woman varied greatly by class. A wealthy woman might spend hours on hair, clothing, jewelry. Hairstyles could be complex, supported by hairpieces and careful arrangement by slave attendants. Cosmetics were used, sometimes with ingredients we now know were harmful. A poorer woman might be working from early morning, carrying water, buying food, cooking, cleaning, caring for children, sometimes laboring in a trade. Now children. A Roman child's life could be playful and harsh. Children played games, balls, knucklebones, toy figures, small carts, simple dolls. Some of these toys have been found by archaeologists, quiet echoes of laughter preserved in clay and bone. But childhood was also fragile. Many children did not survive early years. Disease moved quickly in crowded neighborhoods. Nutrition could be inconsistent. Education depended on class. Wealthy children could be taught by tutors, often Greek, because Greek culture was highly respected. They learned reading, writing, rhetoric, literature. For boys, becoming a man was marked by rituals, including changing clothing to signify adult status. For girls, education could happen but was often focused on household skills, social behavior, and what their family considered suitable. And for poorer children, education might be limited. Many learned by working early, helping family, apprenticing in trades, learning the practical language of survival. Now, entertainment. We cannot speak about Roman daily life without addressing the spectacles, because even if you were poor, you might still attend. Public entertainment was a tool of politics and social control, but it was also genuinely loved. There were theaters, where comedies, dramas, and performances took place. There were chariot races, especially in places like the Circus Maximus, where factions had passionate supporters. The crowd could roar like a storm. And, yes, there were gladiator games, especially in amphitheaters. Gladiators were often slaves, prisoners, or condemned individuals, trained to fight. Some became famous. Some gained freedom. Many died young. The games were brutal, and they reveal something uncomfortable about human nature and about politics. The state could offer blood and spectacle as distraction, as bonding, as a public ritual of power. But it is important to remember that not every Roman attended every event. Daily life could be too busy, too exhausting, and moral opinions differed. Some people criticized excess entertainment, even within Rome. Now, as the night deepens, we return to the small, quiet spaces. Imagine a Roman apartment at night. A family sits close. The lamp is dim. Oil is not infinite. Shadows breathe on the wall. Outside, you hear distant voices, footsteps, somewhere, laughter, somewhere, an argument. A mother adjusts a child's blanket. A man counts coins. Someone says a short prayer. Not a dramatic prayer, just a small sentence into the darkness. Because the world is uncertain, and rituals are a way of holding it. In a wealthy house, the night is different. Rooms are larger. Air moves through courtyards. Guards might be present. Servants sleep nearby, ready if needed. But even there, fear exists. The empire is powerful, but individuals are vulnerable. Disease does not care about status. Accidents do not care. Political shifts can turn a powerful family into a target. Now, let us widen our lens beyond the city, because the Roman Empire was not only Rome, it was a network of provinces, towns, forts, farms, roads, and ports. Daily life in a provincial city could be quieter, shaped by local traditions mixed with Roman influence. In the countryside, farmers worked with rhythms older than the empire itself, planting, harvesting, tending animals. The empire's roads connected these worlds. Roman roads were engineering achievements, built for military movement and commerce. Along them were inns, posting stations, milestones. Travel was slow and risky, but possible. And across this wide world, Roman daily life had common threads. The reliance on social networks, the importance of public spaces, the central role of water, the omnipresence of class, the reality of slavery, the blend of practicality and superstition, the love of community, even in crowded places. Now, one more subject, quiet but essential: death. Romans lived with death close, not because they were gloomy, but because mortality was visible. Infant deaths, disease, accidents, violence. Funerals mattered. The wealthy could stage elaborate processions, masks of ancestors, musicians, public displays of lineage. Burial practices varied. Cremation was common in certain periods, burial in others. Tombs lined roads outside cities, because burying inside city boundaries was often restricted. Grief was public and private. People mourned. They honored the dead with offerings and remembrance. And in that, Rome feels familiar. A city of humans. Humans who laughed, worried, loved, argued, hoped. Humans who wanted comfort, safety. Meaning, 2,000 years later, we still want those same things. Now, let us return to the beginning. A Roman day begins with light and noise, and it ends with darkness and uncertainty. But within that day, there are countless small moments that make the empire feel real. A hand reaching for bread, a child chasing a ball, a woman bargaining for vegetables, a slave carrying water, silent, steady, a crowd gasping at the races, steam rising in the bathhouse, oil lamps flickering, a prayer whispered into the corner of a room. Rome was not only emperors and battles. Rome was daily life. And if you are still awake, I want you to imagine one last scene. You are walking home at night. The stones are cooler now. The air smells of smoke and food and distant water. A lamp glows in a window above you. Somewhere, someone is singing softly. You pass a shrine with a small offering left behind. You feel the weight of the day in your body. And you realize something simple and strange. You are not so different from them. Different tools, different clothes, different knowledge, but the same tiredness, the same desire to be safe, the same need to belong. So if your eyes are heavy now, let them close. Let the streets fade. Let the voices blur into gentle noise. Let the empire dissolve into quiet stone and distant memory. Good night, and sweet dreams. If you want, in the next episode, we can choose a single Roman life and follow it minute by minute. A baker's day, a soldier's day, a bath attendant's day, or a young woman navigating the city's rules.